Billionaire saw a single mom sharing one meal with her kids and changed their lives forever. Rain drifted over Chicago in thin, silver lines, blurring the streetlights into halos of gold. The hour was late, past midnight, when most of the city had already shut its doors and silenced its noise. But under the awning of a closed convenience store, a woman sat curled on a wooden crate, holding her two children close. Her name was Emma Lane, 32 years old, her hair damp and clinging to her cheeks. Beside her were Noah, 7, and Ella, 4, small, shivering figures bundled inside worn jackets. Their sneakers were soaked, their breaths visible in the cold. From a paper bag on her lap, Emma pulled out a single hamburger wrapped in foil. It was the only thing she could afford that night. She hesitated for a moment, looking at her children, one hungry, one half asleep, and quietly tore the sandwich into 3 pieces with her hands. She gave the larger halves to the kids. "Here you go, baby. Eat slowly," she murmured, forcing a smile. Noah frowned, pushing his piece toward her. "Mom, you didn't eat." "I'll eat later," she said softly. "Moms don't get hungry until their kids are full." Ella giggled, though her voice trembled from the cold. "That's silly, Mommy." Emma smiled, even as her stomach ached with emptiness. She brushed wet hair from Ella's forehead and whispered, "It's just one of my superpowers." Across the street, parked beside the curb, Julian Cross watched the scene from behind the windshield of his black sedan. The car engine idled quietly, throwing faint warmth into the night. Julian, 39, CEO of Cross Foods International, a man whose signature appeared on more contracts than personal letters, sat motionless, eyes fixed on the woman under the awning. He had just left a charity gala downtown, a glittering event where people toasted to feeding the world, while half the leftovers went to waste. He still wore his tailored black suit, though the tie was loosened and his expression unreadable. He couldn't explain why he hadn't driven away yet. Maybe it was the way the woman divided that meal. No hesitation, no bitterness, just quiet grace. Something about it pierced through the steel calm he had worn for years. When Ella's small laugh reached him through the rain, he closed his eyes and saw another image. A cramped apartment kitchen long ago. His mother, sleeves rolled up, dividing a single bowl of soup between them. "If one of us is full," she had said, "then neither of us is truly hungry." That memory hit him like a pulse beneath the ribs. His mother had died young. Heart failure after years of working double shifts at her tiny diner, The Hearth. She had taught him everything about kindness and food, but as he built his empire, he had lost the thread of what she meant. His company had grown into a machine, factories, shareholders, profit margins. But somewhere along the way, the heart had gone missing. Now, under the cold Chicago rain, that missing piece looked a lot like the woman under the awning. Emma wrapped the foil around what little was left and slipped it back into the bag. She hugged both kids closer as the wind whipped through the empty street. "Close your eyes," she whispered. "Pretend we're home and it's warm, and I'm baking bread." Noah leaned against her shoulder. "With cinnamon?" he mumbled. "With cinnamon," she promised. Julian leaned forward, watching as she tucked her coat around the children, her movements careful, protective. He could see exhaustion in her posture, the kind that comes from long days and longer nights. But there was no defeat in her face, only quiet strength. He remembered his mother's words again. "If one of us is full," and something inside him shifted. A taxi splashed past, scattering puddles onto the curb. Emma turned her head away to shield the kids, and Julian caught a clearer glimpse of her face under the streetlight. Tired eyes, chapped lips, the faintest trace of lipstick, as if she had tried to stay presentable even for no one. For reasons he couldn't name, that detail hurt more than anything else. He reached for his phone, then stopped halfway. What could he do? Offer money? That would insult her. A ride? He'd frighten her. He sat back, conflicted. For years, he'd signed million-dollar checks for food programs that barely touched real people. Yet here, 10 feet away, was a woman who made one sandwich look like a feast. A small voice cut through the rain. "Mommy, will we have pancakes tomorrow?" Emma hesitated. "We'll see, sweetheart. But you promised last time." "I know," she whispered. "Maybe someone will help us this time." Julian swallowed hard. He didn't know why those words felt like they were meant for him. Maybe they were. When Emma stood, lifting Ella into her arms and taking Noah's hand, Julian instinctively turned off his headlights so she wouldn't see him. She led her children down the dim sidewalk, their shadows stretching thin under each flickering street lamp. Julian stayed still, watching until they disappeared around the corner. In the silence that followed, the rain slowed to a soft drizzle. He leaned back in his seat, heart heavy but strangely alive, and whispered to no one, "Mom, I think I just saw you again." Then he started the car, the engine humming quietly. He didn't drive toward his penthouse or the office tower that bore his name. Instead, he turned in the direction where the woman and her children had gone, as if some invisible thread was pulling him forward through the rain. Morning broke gray and thin over Chicago. The rain had stopped, but the cold still clung to the streets. In a quiet corner near Lincoln Avenue, Emma Lane pushed open the creaking door of St. Helena Church. The smell of wax and old wood filled the air. She guided Noah and little Ella inside, their small boots squeaking on the tile floor. Volunteers were setting up folding tables for breakfast service. "Good morning," a woman greeted softly. "Sit wherever you'd like. Pancakes and coffee today." Emma smiled faintly. "Thank you." It had been a long time since she'd heard those words spoken kindly. She helped the children remove their coats and watched them eat, their faces brightening with each bite. When they finished, she stayed to help clear tables, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, hands moving automatically. Wipe, rinse, dry. The work steadied her. It was something she understood. While the other volunteers chatted, Emma kept quiet. Her mind drifted to the kitchen she once called home, the stainless steel counters of the Aurora Hotel, where she used to work as a line cook. She could still hear the rush of pans, the shouts of orders, the hum of the hood vents. It had been her second home, the only place where she felt capable and proud. She had started as a dishwasher, rising through patience and skill. Her soup recipes had even made the staff menu, especially the creamy potato and onion soup she learned from her mother. That soup had once made guests smile. Then came the fire. It started late one night after service, when she stayed behind to clean. A faulty outlet sparked. The flames spread fast, licking the steel counters and blackening the walls. She managed to pull the alarm and help another worker out, but not before a beam collapsed near her shoulder. The pain had been instant, like lightning. Her right arm never fully recovered. She could still move it, but not with precision. A chef needs steady hands. Hers trembled now when she sliced. The hotel management said they were sorry. They said insurance would take care of it, but weeks passed, and no help came. Then came the letter. Termination of employment due to health limitations. No severance, no benefits. Emma had stood in the empty locker room that day, staring at her reflection in the dented metal mirror. Her apron was stained, her badge still pinned to the pocket. She had worked there 8 years. She walked out quietly and never went back. Her husband, Paul, tried at first to comfort her. He was a musician, gentle and hopeful, always chasing small gigs. But when bills piled up, his hope soured into frustration. "I can't carry all this, Em," he'd said one night, shoving his guitar into its case. "I didn't sign up for this kind of life." He left the next morning, leaving behind a note and the smell of cheap cologne. That was 2 years ago. Since then, Emma had done everything she could. Laundry for neighbors, late-night cleaning, handing out flyers. Whatever kept her children fed. She learned to stretch $5 into a week's worth of meals, to smile at landlords who threatened eviction, to swallow pride for the sake of survival. Through it all, she taught Noah and Ella to say please and thank you. "We may not have much," she often said, "but we still have manners. That's worth more than money." As she stacked chairs after breakfast, One of the church volunteers approached. A woman in a red scarf named Maria. "You have a good hand for this," she said. "Were you ever in food work?" Emma nodded. "I was. Before things changed." Maria gave her a sympathetic look. "They always do, but maybe they can change again." She handed Emma a small card, information for a local support program offering temporary kitchen jobs. Emma traced the print with her thumb, but said nothing. Hope was a dangerous thing when you'd lost so much of it. Outside, the sky began to clear. Emma held her children's hands as they walked down the block toward the bus stop. Her shoulder ached from the cold, and the wind caught her hair, lifting it like ribbons. Noah asked, "Mom, do you think you'll cook in a big kitchen again?" She hesitated, then smiled softly. "Maybe not a big one," she said, "but maybe something small, something warm." Across the city, Julian Cross sat in his office overlooking the skyline. The previous night's rain still shimmered on the glass. He couldn't focus on the report open before him. The image of the woman under the awning wouldn't leave his mind. The way she smiled at her kids. The way she made one meal stretch with grace. He looked at the framed photo on his desk. His mother standing outside her old diner, apron tied neatly around her waist, her hand resting on his young shoulder. Beneath the photo, engraved in brass, were her words, "Feed them with love, not pity." He whispered the words aloud, almost like a prayer. Then he picked up the phone and called his assistant. "Nora," he said, "find out who runs the community kitchens near Lincoln Avenue. I want to know who they help and how." She paused, surprised. "Should I ask under your name?" He thought for a moment. "No," he said quietly. "Not yet." That night, as Emma tucked her children into bed in their small basement apartment, she thought she heard the faintest sound of rain starting again outside. She pressed her palm against the window pane and closed her eyes. Somewhere out there, she hoped, kindness still existed. She didn't know that someone had already started looking for her name. The following week brought another wave of gray mornings and biting wind. The holidays were close, but for Emma Lane and her children, December only meant colder nights and longer bus rides. That Thursday, after finishing a few hours of cleaning work at a laundromat, she walked with Noah and Ella toward their favorite corner bakery. It wasn't fancy, just a narrow shop called Maple Crust, with a bell above the door that chimed softly each time someone entered. The smell of yeast and sugar spilled out into the street. Inside, Emma reached into her worn canvas purse and counted her coins carefully. "1 loaf of day-old bread, please," she said to the cashier. The girl behind the counter smiled faintly and returned with a small paper bag. But before Emma could hand over the coins, the girl shook her head. "Someone already paid for you this morning." Emma blinked, confused. "There must be a mistake." The girl shook her head again. "No mistake. The gentleman said you'd be by with 2 kids. He paid for a loaf and left this." She held out a note folded into quarters. On the paper, written in neat cursive, were 4 words. "For second chances. J." Emma stared at the message, unsure what to feel. Gratitude, suspicion, hope? She tucked the note into her pocket and thanked the cashier. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft flakes catching on Ella's lashes. Noah broke off a piece of bread and offered it to his sister. "It's warm," he said with delight. Emma smiled faintly, but her mind churned. Who would do this? Someone from the church, maybe? She looked up and down the street, half expecting to see a familiar face. But there was only the quiet rhythm of traffic and the hiss of tires on wet pavement. Across the street, parked near a row of delivery trucks, Julian Cross sat inside a different car this time, an unmarked black sedan. He watched discreetly, not wanting to intrude, only to see. When he saw Emma hand the bread to her children, the smallest smile tugged at his mouth. His assistant, Nora, sat beside him, scrolling through a tablet. "You really went yourself, sir?" she asked. "It's freezing out here." Julian kept his eyes on the family. "Sometimes you can't understand from behind an office desk," he murmured. Nora hesitated. "Do you plan to approach her?" He shook his head. "Not yet. Some people don't trust help that comes too easily." He remembered his mother again. How she once slipped sandwiches into brown bags for strangers who passed her diner. She never told them her name. "If kindness asks for attention," she'd say, "it stops being kindness." For the first time in years, Julian understood what she meant. That night, back in their tiny apartment, Emma spread out the bread and a small carton of soup she had managed to buy. The children sat cross-legged on the floor, coloring on old takeout menus. "Mom," Noah said suddenly, "maybe the man who paid for our bread was Santa." Ella's eyes widened. "Really?" Emma laughed softly. "Maybe someone who believes in him," she said, breaking the bread into pieces again. Later, when the kids were asleep, she pulled the folded note from her pocket and smoothed it out on the table. For second chances. The words stirred something deep in her chest, something she had almost forgotten how to feel. She looked around the dim room, peeling wallpaper, a broken heater, the hum of a distant train. It wasn't much, but for the first time in weeks, she whispered to herself, "Maybe things can change." Across town, Julian sat alone in his penthouse office. The city glittered outside his window, but his mind was elsewhere. On his desk lay an old blueprint labeled the Hearth Project. It had been his mother's dream, to build a network of small kitchens run by and for people who had lost their footing. After her death, the plan was shelved when investors pushed for faster profits. Julian stared at it now, fingers tracing the faded ink. He had always meant to return to it, but never did. Tonight, her words echoed again. Feed them with love, not pity. He picked up his phone and dialed. "Nora," he said quietly, "I want to restart the Hearth Project." There was silence on the other end. "Under the company's name?" she asked. "No," he replied, anonymously. "We'll need locations, basic equipment, and a hiring plan. No resumes, no interviews. Just cook from the heart." When he hung up, he leaned back, exhaling slowly. The idea felt reckless, yet right. For years, he had built things that fed millions but meant nothing. This time, he wanted to build something small and real. He imagined Emma standing under that awning again, dividing her meal, her hands trembling but sure. He didn't know her story yet, but he wanted to give her a place where she could stand again. The next morning, as sunlight glimmered faintly off the icy rooftops, Emma walked Noah and Ella to school, holding the paper bag with what was left of the bread. On the corner, a flyer fluttered against a lamppost. It read, "Community kitchen opening soon. Cooks needed. No experience required. Just heart." She stopped, reading it twice, the words "just heart" echoing in her head. She didn't know it yet, but this small sign would lead her back to the warmth she thought she had lost forever. The following Monday, the sky was pale and heavy with snow when Emma Lane stood in front of the building listed on the flyer. The sign above the door was simple, "The Hearth Project." The windows were still dusty, the smell of paint and sawdust lingering in the cold air. She hesitated, clutching Noah's and Ella's hands. Her heart thudded with uncertainty. This could be another disappointment, another promise that led nowhere. But Ella tugged at her sleeve. "Mommy, it smells like soup," she whispered. Emma smiled faintly. "Then maybe it's a good place." Inside, the kitchen was small but alive with motion. A few people, men and women in mismatched aprons, were unpacking boxes, scrubbing counters, arranging utensils. The sound of laughter and clinking pans filled the space. A man with salt and pepper hair greeted her warmly. "You must be here about the cooking shifts." "Name?" "Emma Lane," she said quietly. He looked at his clipboard and nodded. "Good. We don't ask for resumes here. Just cook something that means home to you. If it speaks to people, you're in." He motioned to an empty station. "Supplies are over there. Take your time." Emma set her worn canvas bag on the counter. Inside were her old tools, A chipped paring knife, a bent whisk, a wooden spoon with a crack down the handle. She'd kept them all these years as reminders of who she once was. Her shoulder still ached from the old injury, but she rolled it gently and tied her apron tighter. Noah and Ella found a quiet corner with crayons and paper, sitting cross-legged near the wall. Emma exhaled slowly and looked around the kitchen. It wasn't the Aurora Hotel, but it was bright, alive, real. She began to work with steady, careful movements, washing, peeling, slicing. The rhythm came back to her like an old song. She chose simple ingredients: potatoes, onions, cream, thyme. As the soup simmered, a soft, familiar scent filled the air. The volunteers nearby paused, turning their heads toward the pot. The aroma carried warmth, something humble yet comforting. When the soup thickened to the right texture, Emma ladled it into a plain white bowl and placed it on the counter. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the heat, but from the hope that someone might taste it and see her worth again. Moments later, a man stepped forward to sample it. He wore a navy shirt, sleeves rolled neatly, his expression calm and unreadable. "Quality control," someone whispered. Emma glanced up but quickly looked away, too focused on her dish to pay attention. The man lifted a spoonful to his lips. His eyes softened instantly. The flavor, the delicate balance of sweet onion, rich cream, and thyme, struck him like a memory long buried. For a fleeting moment, he was a boy again, sitting at his mother's diner, watching her smile as she served the same soup to a weary traveler. His throat tightened. He took another spoonful and set the spoon down gently. "It's perfect," he said, voice barely audible. Then he turned and left before anyone could ask who he was. Emma stood frozen. She didn't know if his words were praise or politeness. The kitchen buzzed around her again. She cleaned her station quietly, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Before leaving, she noticed something on the tasting counter. A silver spoon, polished and engraved with tiny letters. "For second chances." Her heart caught. It was the same phrase from the bakery note. She ran her fingers over the engraving, feeling the cool metal against her skin. A strange warmth spread through her chest, like recognition without understanding. That evening, after the last pot was washed and the lights dimmed, Emma wrapped her tools and gathered her children. "Did you like it here?" she asked softly as they stepped outside. Noah nodded. "Everyone smiled, Mom. I think they liked your soup." Ella clutched her hand. "Can we come back tomorrow?" Emma looked at the spoon still tucked in her pocket and smiled. "I hope so." Across town, Julian Cross returned to his penthouse later than usual. He placed his jacket over the chair and poured himself a glass of water. On his counter lay a paper takeout cup someone had left on his desk, a sample from the new kitchen. He lifted the lid, and the scent of potato and onion drifted up, soft and familiar. He smiled faintly. She had made it. Without knowing who he was, she had brought his mother's recipe back to life. For a long moment, Julian stood at the window, the city lights shimmering below. He thought of the woman in the rain, of the small note folded inside a paper bag, and of his mother's words echoing through time. "Feed them with love, not pity." He turned off the light, leaving the room bathed only in the glow of the skyline. Somewhere across the city, he imagined Emma sitting with her children, the same soup steaming on their small table. And for the first time in years, he felt full, not with success, but with something far rarer: peace. The following weeks passed like a quiet rhythm of hope. Every morning, Emma arrived at the hearth project before sunrise with Noah and Ella bundled in their coats. The children had become part of the kitchen's heartbeat, coloring quietly in their corner, humming songs while Emma worked at the stove. Her soups had started to draw attention. People said they tasted like comfort, like something they'd forgotten they missed. Emma didn't seek praise. She only smiled and said, "It's just food made with care." But one Wednesday, the fragile calm cracked. Two women in dark jackets appeared at the door, badges clipped to their collars. They introduced themselves as agents from Child Protective Services. The room went still. "We've received a report," one of them said, flipping open a folder. A mother bringing children to an unsafe work environment. We need to verify the living conditions and their care. Emma's breath caught. There must be some mistake. I work here, and they sit safely over there. She pointed to the corner where Ella was clutching her crayon box, eyes wide with fear. Noah stood protectively in front of her. The agent's tone was firm but not unkind. We'll need to follow up. Do you have a permanent residence, Ms. Lane? Emma hesitated, her voice breaking. I'm renting a small basement unit. It's temporary. The other woman scribbled something in her notebook. And medical coverage for the children? Emma looked down. Not right now, but I'm trying. The agents exchanged a glance. We'll schedule a review hearing, one said. Until then, please refrain from bringing the children here during work hours. The words struck like cold water. Emma's throat tightened. Please don't take them. I'm doing everything I can. Her voice cracked, trembling with desperation. The women gave sympathetic but rehearsed nods and left. The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Emma stood motionless, tears threatening to spill. At the far end of the room, a door opened. Julian Cross, in his usual quiet way, had just stepped in for a routine check. He stopped when he saw the look on Emma's face. What happened? He asked. She shook her head, unable to speak. The volunteer supervisor explained softly, CPS visit. Someone reported her. Julian's jaw tightened. He turned to Emma. Who would do that? She whispered, maybe a neighbor. They saw me leave early every morning with the kids and assumed the worst. Julian took a slow breath. You don't deserve this. He walked closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. Let me help. She shook her head quickly. I can't take your money. His eyes softened. I'm not offering money. I'm offering to stand beside you. That night, Emma sat in the dim apartment, the letter from CPS trembling in her hand. Noah and Ella were asleep on the couch, huddled under a single blanket. She watched their small chests rise and fall and whispered, I'm sorry, my loves. I'm trying. She pressed her forehead against the letter, fighting tears she had promised herself never to show. The next morning, she arrived at the Hearth Project to find Julian already waiting by the door. He wore no suit, just a gray coat and gloves dusted with snow. You shouldn't be here so early, she said quietly. Neither should you, he replied. But we both have work to do. He handed her a thermos. Coffee, the real kind. She smiled weakly. You didn't have to. Maybe not, he said, but I wanted to. When the others arrived, Julian called the team together. Listen up, everyone, he began. There's been a misunderstanding about our kitchen. I want every safety measure documented and posted. We'll certify this place as a community training site under the Hearth Project name. His tone was calm but firm, a leader reclaiming order. Emma realized then that he wasn't just a kind stranger. He had authority here, real authority. Later, when they were alone near the pantry, she looked at him and whispered, Who are you, really? Julian met her gaze for a long moment before answering. Someone who believes in what you're doing. She frowned, half confused, half grateful. And what am I doing? He smiled softly, reminding people what food is supposed to mean. That afternoon, as Emma stirred a pot of soup, Noah and Ella's laughter echoed faintly in her mind. She refused to let fear win. Whatever came next, she would fight for them. And she wasn't alone anymore. Across town, in a quiet office, Julian met with his assistant, Nora. File the papers today, he instructed. List Emma Lane as lead culinary coordinator, and make sure the CPS caseworkers receive proof that the children are in a certified environment. Nora glanced up. Under your name, sir? Julian shook his head. Under the Hearth Project. This isn't about me. That evening, as Emma locked up the kitchen, she found a folded note by her station. It was written in the same handwriting as the bakery note. Keep cooking. The world needs your warmth. She looked around the empty kitchen, smiling through tears. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. Snow fell softly over Chicago the next evening, layering the streets in a pale shimmer. Inside the Hearth Project's kitchen, the lights glowed warm against the storm outside. Emma Lane wiped down the counters after the last pot was washed. The volunteers had gone home, leaving behind only the soft hum of the refrigerator and the steady ticking of the wall clock. Julian Cross stood by the window, his coat still draped over a chair. He had stayed late again, quietly helping close up. "You should go home," Emma said with a tired smile. "I think the city's about to freeze over." "Then I'd rather freeze here," he replied lightly, his tone softer than usual. She laughed a little, shaking her head. "You really don't talk like the people I used to work for." "Maybe that's because I don't want to be one of them," he said simply. For a while, they cleaned in companionable silence. When the last light flickered above the counter, Julian reached into his coat pocket and took out something wrapped in a handkerchief. "I've been meaning to give you this," he said, placing it on the counter. Emma hesitated, unwrapping it carefully. Inside lay the silver spoon she had found weeks earlier, the words "for second chances" engraved across the handle. "It's yours," he said. "No," she whispered. "I just borrowed it from the tasting counter. I meant to give it back." "You already did," Julian replied. "You've given it more meaning than I ever could." She ran her thumb across the engraving. "Where did it come from?" Julian leaned against the counter, looking at the reflection of the spoon in the light. "My mother's diner," he said quietly. "She used to serve soup to people who couldn't pay. One night, someone left this spoon behind. She kept it as a reminder that even the smallest kindness could return to you one day. When she died, she left it to me." His voice faltered slightly. "I didn't know what to do with it. I thought if I gave it to someone else who still believed in kindness, maybe I'd understand her better." Emma looked up, her eyes softening. "Your mother sounds like a good person." "She was," he said. "You remind me of her." The words hung in the air, gentle and heavy at once. "Why me?" she asked after a moment. Julian met her gaze. "Because I saw you on a rainy night, sharing one meal with your children under a store awning. You didn't know anyone was watching, and you still gave everything you had. That night changed something in me." Emma froze. "You were there?" He nodded slowly. "I was leaving a charity gala. I saw you and couldn't forget it. A few days later, I started looking for you, not to pity you, but to help in a way that made sense. The Hearth Project was supposed to be my mother's dream. You gave it life again." Emma's hand trembled slightly around the spoon. "All this time, the bread, the note, the kitchen, you?" He nodded once more. "I didn't want you to feel like a charity case. You didn't need saving. You just needed a door to open." For a long moment, neither spoke. The clock ticked softly. Outside, snow pressed against the glass like a memory. Finally, Emma exhaled, a shaky laugh escaping her. "I should be angry," she said. "You followed me, hid who you were, but I can't be." Julian's eyes softened. "Why not?" "Because you did what no one else ever did," she whispered. "You saw me, not my situation." He smiled faintly. "Maybe because I know what it's like to lose everything and start again. After my mother died, I built an empire out of fear. Fear of being poor, of being helpless. But the night I saw you, I realized I was the one starving. You reminded me what real food tastes like." Emma blinked back tears, unsure what to say. She looked around the kitchen. The pots, the counters, the faint smell of thyme still in the air. "So what now?" she asked quietly. Julian reached for her hand, his touch hesitant but steady. "Now we keep doing what matters. Together, if you'll let me." She stared at their hands, warmth rising to her chest. "You don't owe me anything, Julian." Maybe not, he said, but I owe the world someone like you. The door creaked open as a gust of wind blew in a flurry of snow. Julian helped her into her coat, his movements gentle. Outside, the city lights shimmered through the white. They stood on the steps for a moment, watching the flakes fall. When I was little, Emma said softly, my mom used to tell me snow was God's way of giving the world a fresh start. Then tonight, Julian murmured, it's giving us one too. He opened his umbrella and held it over her as they walked down the street side by side. Their footsteps left two sets of prints on the fresh snow, slowly merging into one trail as they disappeared into the quiet, glowing city. Spring crept slowly into Chicago, washing away the last of the snow and filling the streets with the smell of rain and budding trees. Inside a once-empty storefront on Willow Street, the lights of a new beginning glowed warm against the twilight. The sign over the door read, Hearth and Home, because every meal can change a life. Emma Lane stood by the window, her reflection flickering against the glass. Behind her, the kitchen hummed with soft laughter, the clatter of pots, and the low music of an evening crowd. Noah and Ella sat at a small table near the counter, helping fold napkins while a few volunteers prepared to serve the night's menu. Soup, bread, and a pie that smelled of cinnamon and butter. Julian Cross stood beside Emma, sleeves rolled up, watching as the first guests arrived. Most were families from the neighborhood, some struggling, some lonely, some just curious, but all were greeted with the same warmth. Emma smiled at each one, moving between tables, offering bowls of her potato and onion soup with the same gentle care she once gave her children under a store awning. When she passed Julian, he caught her hand briefly. Full house, he said quietly. Looks like Chicago was hungrier than we thought. She laughed softly. Hungry for kindness, maybe. In the corner, Ella tugged at her mother's apron. Mommy, can I give this one? She asked, holding a small bowl carefully between her hands. Emma knelt, steadying her. Of course, sweetheart. Just don't spill. Ella carried the bowl to an elderly man sitting alone near the window. He smiled at her and whispered, Thank you, little one. She ran back, proud. He said thank you, Mom. Emma brushed her daughter's hair gently. Then that means you did it right. When the rush finally slowed, Julian and Emma stepped outside for air. The evening sky had turned soft blue, streaked with the last hint of sunset. Across the street, the city lights blinked awake one by one. Emma leaned against the wall, her hands still dusted with flour. Do you ever think about that night? She asked quietly. Julian nodded. Every day, it reminds me that sometimes the smallest moments, like sharing one meal, can change everything. He looked at her, eyes steady. You changed everything, Emma. She turned toward him, her expression tender, but still touched by disbelief. You gave me a place to stand again. You built this, Julian smiled. You built it. I just opened the door. For a moment, they stood in silence, listening to the muffled laughter drifting from inside. Then, from behind them, Ella's voice carried through the doorway. Mommy, Mr. Julian, come see. They stepped back in to find Noah and Ella standing at a small wooden table near the window. On it sat a framed photo, the first taken of the four of them together. Below the picture, Ella had written in crayon, Home is where we share. Emma's breath caught, and Julian's hand brushed against hers. She's right, he whispered. She's wiser than both of us. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the lights were dimmed, Emma stayed behind to close up. Julian lingered at the counter, drying glasses. You don't have to do everything yourself, he said. She smiled without looking up. Old habits die hard. He set the towel down and walked closer. Then let me help you unlearn them. She looked up, eyes shining with quiet gratitude. On the counter between them sat the silver spoon, its engraving catching the faint light. Emma picked it up and turned it over in her hand. Do you ever think your mother knew what she was leaving behind when she gave this to you? Julian smiled softly. I think she hoped someone would finish what she started. He gestured toward the kitchen around them. Looks like you did. Emma laughed through a tear. No, we did. She placed the spoon in a small wooden frame by the window, right beneath the restaurant's name. For a moment, they both stood there, watching their reflections mix with the warm light behind the glass. Outside, a light drizzle began to fall, the kind that softened the city into gold. Julian looked up and murmured, "Rain again." Emma nodded. Maybe it's just reminding us how it all began. He slipped his hand into hers, and she didn't pull away. Inside, the children's laughter echoed faintly from the back room, mingling with the quiet hum of the lights. As they stepped out onto the sidewalk, Emma locked the door and glanced at the glowing sign once more. Hearth and home, she smiled. Every meal, every kindness, it all comes back around, doesn't it? Julian squeezed her hand gently. Always. They walked down the street together beneath a shared umbrella, the city glistening around them. Behind them, the window of Hearth and Home shone like a lantern against the night, the silver spoon gleaming under the words, "Because every meal can change a life." As the lights of Hearth and Home glowed against the quiet street, one truth lingered in the air, that a single act of kindness can still change everything. If this story warmed your heart, share it with someone who needs a little hope tonight, because sometimes all it takes is one meal and one moment of compassion. Follow and subscribe to Midus Stories, where every story begins with the heart.